friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Hello Bluebird Peekaboo stamp set. So I've stamped all the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with the large pumpkin, and I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR18 for that. And I'm starting with the YR18 to put in some shadows along the top and the bottom of that pumpkin so that the middle part that is the most rounded will catch the most light. So that's where my highlight is going to go. So I'm just bringing that color in and adding in extra lines that extend a little bit further down wherever there is an artist drawn line there, just to kind of indicate the little ridges that make up the pumpkin. And then I'm going to bring in the YR14, which is going to be my mid-tone. I filled in the back edge of that, although it's going to be covered up in the final card, so I knew I didn't need to worry too much about that back little sliver there. And then I'm going to pull that color in toward that center from both the top and the bottom, making sure to catch the edge of that YR18 and scrub over that a little bit so that I break up any harsh lines. And then once I have that YR14 laid in, I'm going to come in with the YR12, and that's going to be my highlight. So I did want to mention that this is a sneak peek of one of the brand new Halloween sets that are releasing tomorrow, October 29th at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you're on the East Coast like me. And there will be a whole Halloween release. So this is the day before if you're watching this when it comes out. So yeah, definitely stay tuned. There's so much cuteness in this Halloween / fall release. So you're definitely going to want to check that out on the Hello Bluebird blog and Instagram. So I did go a little bit outside the lines on that pumpkin. So I'm just taking a white gel pen to clean that up. The orange tones have a lot of red in them, and red is notorious for bleeding. And even though I tried pushing it back with my colorless blender, it's really hard to get it to go back over the lines. So just using a white gel pen makes it nice and easy to clean up that bottom edge. I also colored in the top of the pumpkin that was cut out, and I'm adding in some of these orange tones to the leaves that are down in the little strip and then scattered around. And then for the inside of the pumpkin, I'm using Y35 and Y38. I'm not that worried about the inside of the large part of the pumpkin because it's going to be mainly covered up, but I did want to have a little extra shading up on the cap there. So I did do 2 layers of that just to make it a little bit more prominent. And then I'm going to switch to a brighter orange combo using YR04, YR07, and YR09. And I'll do one of the smaller pumpkins with this combo in the same way, adding those darkest colors to the bottom and top, making sure that that center area is going to be the most highlighted because that's where the pumpkin is most rounded. So that's where it would reflect the most light. And then I'll blend out the YR09 with the YR07 and then fill in the center with the YR04. And then I'm also going to throw a little bit of this onto some of those leaves as well because I wanted to have, you know, a mix of colors on my leaves to just make them look a little bit bright and add some extra little pops of color to the card. So I'm just going around using that YR09 first, and then I'll blend that out with the YR07, and then use that YR04. And I'm still leaving some space on all of those leaves to add additional colors to mix with these shades. Next, I wanted to add in some red, but rather than going with like a bright fire engine red, I wanted to do something more in the cranberry family or like a wine red. So I went with R35, R37, and R39. And I'm just using this on some of the leaves. So I started with the darkest shade, that R39. I'll blend that out with the R37. And, you know, I'm coloring right into some of the orange that I've already laid down on those leaves because I really want those colors to blend and kind of meld together. And then I'm going to bring in that YR35, which has more of a pinky tone to it. So that's going to really help with the transition between those shades. And then I wanted to bring in some even softer reds, like pinky tones. So I'm actually going to keep that R35 and then add in R30 and R32 to that. So I get a little bit of like a blush pink in there, which I thought would be nice and something a little bit different for the leaves. So this time I'm starting with that R35 and blending out with the R32. On some of those leaves, I'm just going to use those two shades because they're so small, and the R30 is so light that it wouldn't necessarily blend that well with the orange on its own. So it just depends. And then for some of those leaves, I'm just going to use the R32 and blend out with the R30. And then I'm also going to use these shades for the inside of the bunny's ears. So just using that R32 for that. I also colored in his nose, and then I blended that out with the R30. And I also decided to do some rosy cheeks. I usually do it after I've colored a critter, but you can also do it before. It doesn't really make a difference, not that much anyway. And then I wanted to have some olive tones on the leaves. So I'm going to use YG91 and YG93. I wanted them to be pretty pale, as if, you know, they're more dried out leaves rather than a nice fresh bright olive. So I went ahead and filled in the rest of those. And then I'm going to darken up this combo by adding in YG95 and YG97 to do the little stems on the pumpkins. So I started with the YG97, blended out with the YG95. I probably could have filled in with the YG93, but I ended up adding a little of the YG91 in there as well. And then I'm going to move on to some E40s. I'm using E40, E41, and E42 for my last pumpkin. So I wanted to do one of those white pumpkins that you see quite a lot at this time of year. And so I'm starting with the E42 for those shadows and then blending out with the E41. And once I have that done, I'm going to bring in that E40, but I put it in pretty lightly and even left a tiny little sliver of white space in there because I just didn't want it to get too dark. I wanted to keep it light and bright, but I did want to increase the saturation in those shadowed areas, so I did do a second layer of all three shades. And then I'm actually going to color the bunny with these as well. I am going to skip the E42 for now though and just start with the E41 as the darkest, adding a little shading right around the edges of the face. Since the bunny's facing completely forward, I'm doing my shading equal on both sides. And then I'll have the highlight in the center of the face and the chest and on the tops of the paws. I'm blending out that E41 with the E40 and then just letting that fade into the white cardstock in the center for the highlight. But then I wanted to add in a few little extra details to add some personality. So I'll bring in E43 for that. I wanted these to be a little bit more subtle, so I went with lighter shades, but if you wanted more prominent spots, you could go with even like the E44. but I just added in like a darker ear and a little patch right below the ear. I added a little patch on the opposite arm on the right hand side, and then a little ring around his eye, and then just blended that back down in the reverse to get it to transition smoothly. I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and went over his little eye that's open and trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I took a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to add some Distress Oxide inking onto that, starting with the shade Carve Pumpkin, which I'm going to add to the center of that panel, leaving some white space along the edges. Next, I'll bring in Kitsched Flamingo and take that up toward the top of the sky in this little scene. And the colors don't look great just yet, but I will work back and forth between them to get them to blend a little bit better in a minute. But first, I'm going to take some bundled sage and add that down at the bottom for the grass. And I'm just blending that right into that carved pumpkin, just like I did at the top. So that's getting a little bit smaller there, but like I said, I will go back and add more of all of those inks and just brighten up that saturation and depth, and also smooth out the blend a little bit more. So I'm just holding that in the corners since I wanted to keep those white anyway, and that way I have a space to keep my fingers clean. Then I'm going to take some water and squirt that onto an acrylic block so I can pick that up with a paintbrush and tap that off the side and let that soak into that Distress Oxide ink for a few seconds. And then I'll blot that up with a paper towel to kind of lift some of that color and give me that little bit of like a bokeh effect in the background. And then I wanted to splatter on some of each of these inks. So I'm going to start down at the bottom with the bundled sage. Then I'll go up toward the top with that Kitsch Flamingo, and I just cleaned off my paintbrush with a baby wipe so that I wouldn't contaminate the pink with the green because that would turn it a bit muddy. So I added some of splatters with that, and then I'm going to add in some carved pumpkin in the center of that block. And this time I didn't even bother cleaning off my brush because those colors blend nicely together. I'll do a little bit more splatter, and I don't mind at all if some of the colors get into the other sections. I actually think that looks nice. And that panel was trimmed down with the second largest of the Nesting Decal A2 dies from Hello Bluebird. I absolutely love the beautiful edges that gives. So I've popped that in my MISTI, and I'm stamping my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm doing the one that says, "Wishing you pumpkin spice and everything nice." And I stamped that down twice to make sure it was nice and bold. And then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Speckled Eggshell. And I'm going to stamp on the inside with pumpkin spice ink. And this time I went really simple. I just did Hey Pumpkin with another of the small pumpkins to just make it be able to be given for different occasions, depending on the message that I write to my recipient. I'm going to use a piece of pattern paper from the Lawn Fawn Favorite Flannel 6x6. I just trimmed that down with my paper trimmer, and I'm going to glue that to cover the entire front of my card, which is a standard A2 size. It's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And then I've added some foam tape to the back of the focal panel, so I'll peel off those release papers and center that on the card front as best I can. And then once I'm happy with the placement, I'll just press that down to secure it and bring in my images. So I'm going to start with the large pumpkin. I always like to start with my largest image first. And then I'm going to take that little leaf cluster and make sure that it's spaced where I want it above that sentiment. That just helped me to figure out where to adhere that pumpkin down. And then I'm going to add the other two pumpkins. I'll add the light pumpkin over on the left-hand side and the brighter pumpkin over on the right. And then once I have those in place, I can go back to that little strip of leaves and adhere that down at the bottom of all of them. So once I have that in place, I'm just going to hold that down for a second for that glue to start to dry, and then I can add in my bunny. There's a couple different animals that you can put in this large pumpkin, but I just loved that cheeky little wink that that bunny was giving. I thought that was so cute. And then while that is still wet, I wanted to slip one of the leaves under his paws. I just thought it would be fun to have him holding on to something. So I'm going to add that and just adjust it how I want it so you can see a little bit of that stem. And then I wanted to have the cap of the pumpkin kind of resting on the top of his head like a little beret. I thought that would be really cute. So then all that's left is the leaves. There are 3 leaves in this stamp set, and I stamped all of them twice and then one of them 3 times just to give me a little bit of extra variety and to be able to place some here and there. So I'm going to add one extra one to the left and the right along those pumpkins. And then the ones that I wanted to put in the rest of the scene, I'm kind of going to lay out and figure out the placement. I like to make sure that the stems are pointing in different directions from the other one that looks the same, and that the colors are just spread far apart from each other. So once I'm happy with how it's looking, I can start to adhere those down just using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. I just wanted it to look like it was a bit of a windy day so that these leaves are kind of floating around the scene, just stirred up by the wind. And then the last little leaf there, I couldn't decide if I wanted it down lower to add to the pile or if I wanted it on that lighter colored pumpkin. I liked it both places, but I ultimately decided to add it to the lighter pumpkin. I just thought it was a nice accent. It just liked the colors together, really. So I did want to add a little bit of extra detail with some embellishments here. So I grabbed some clear sequins, and I'm going to just add those using my Studio Katia embellishment wand and my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Just setting those down and then allowing them to dry for a couple of seconds, maybe half a minute or so. And then I'm going to add a little bit of glitter to the centers of those. I'm using some platinum Stickles, and it's a little bit thick because it's a couple years old, so I just kind of swirl it around at the top to break the little string and then just add a little dab there. And then I also wanted to add a bit to each of the fall leaves and give them a little bit of sparkle, but not too much because it does cover up the coloring. So just a little tiny amount, and I'm just spreading that around with the nozzle. And then once I've finished that, the card is done. So I will lift that up so you can see all of the detail. I really, really love this little bunny. I think he's so cute. This whole set is one of my favorites. I think it's so darling. So I will be back tomorrow with another sneak peek card and then also a complete overview of the Hello Bluebird Fall / Halloween release. So make sure that you come back tomorrow for that. And I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button, leave me a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. All of the products I use will be listed and linked down below, and I'll add the links to the new release products after they go live tomorrow night. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.